Hello everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to Top 10 Hated Albums That I Love. So if a band has been around long enough, usually they will have an album somewhere in their catalog that fans will consider to be a misstep. Now, there's fans like myself that those albums sometimes are their favorite albums by the band or just considered to be really good albums. And I've got 10 such albums to run through with you. So we're going to do that here in just a bit. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel and I would greatly appreciate it. Of course, if you turn on notifications, you're going to stay up to date on really cool videos just like this, Top 10 Hated Albums That I Love. So let's jump into this here. Number 10, coming in, Genesis, Calling All Stations, the album from 1997. It was their 15th studio album at the time. It's actually their last one to date, which I can't believe. I really would love for them to record one more album and just show what they've got, kind of cap everything off. Because this one here featured their new vocalist, Ray Wilson, who I actually love and have long since followed him after being in Genesis and continue to enjoy what he does. But you know, at the time, the album itself was chastised by the critics. They said it lacked direction. I completely disagree with that aspect of it because for me, if nothing else, it was more of a return to form album in terms of being a prog rock album than the pop stuff they were doing from the 80s. And while I do love the stuff out of the 80s, I also love the other. And so for me, it was a very cool type thing to be doing in the 90s when you couldn't be all pop and everything like that. They just reverted back. And I think that makes the album really, really good in my opinion. And I still pull it out to this day. My favorite track on it is Shipwrecked. If you don't know that one, check it out. Okay, coming in at number 9, Queensryche, Dedicated to Chaos from 2011. It was their 12th studio album at the time, last to feature original vocalist Jeff Tate. Now, the album itself was meant to give both bassist Eddie Jackson and drummer Scott Rockenfeld more of contribution to the album sound itself, focusing on the bass and drums, giving it a real rhythmic feel to it, which I actually think it does here. But it was funny because at the time they discussed it as being a modern dance record, which in no way, shape, or form would I call it that. But in reading about this since that time, it is said that there are other tracks that definitely went more in that direction of the modern dance sound, and that by the time that it all got produced and everything, it had really lost a lot of that, which was actually one of the defining points that split the band with Jeff Tate, or between Jeff Tate and the rest of the guys there, where they felt Jeff was taking too much control over it. I still really like the album. No, it doesn't sound like their other stuff, but for some reason it just works for me. Favorite track off it was the lead single, Get Started. I still love that song and play this album quite a bit. So much so, in fact, that I have this one, which has 4 bonus tracks, but I also have the original jewel case edition of it that is minus those 4 bonus tracks and has a different track listing. So it actually plays out differently, and I do enjoy that as well. Okay, coming in at number 8, we've got Twisted Sister, Love Is for Suckers from 1987, 5th studio album from these guys. It was the last before their initial breakup and is actually their last album of all new original material. Again, shocking when I found that out. I mean, it's just one of those things like you know, but you don't really focus on. And then I'm reading about it when I'm, preparing for this video here, and I'm going, oh my goodness, wow, this is actually the last album of original material. It goes back to 1987. They have done a few one-off tracks here and there, but no full album. Back to this though, it was actually originally meant as a Dee Snider solo album, and of course the label stepped in and forced it to be a Twisted Sister album, and probably why it didn't fare as well, because it's not what people expected. It definitely took on that overt glam metal sound. I don't know that it would have done any better though had it been under Dee Snider solo, but Despite it really having been written as a solo album, all the guys in the band did play on it, but there were notable session musicians brought in as well that added a different flavor to it, most notably Reb Beach from Winger, White Snake, Black Swan, list goes on. And I love that aspect, and it was actually the thing that pulled me into it first, and then fell in love with the album, kind of went from there. Favorite track, Hot Love. Okay, coming in at number 7, and I do not own this on CD, it's so hard to come by. Jefferson Starship, Modern Times, 1981. I love this album, and it's just one of those ones that doesn't get a lot of love. It was their 6th studio album at the time, and it featured a returning Grace Slick after having been gone for 3 years. I think she really brought a lot to the album. She only sings lead, I think, on one of the tracks, but she did add backup vocals to the other, and just hearing that presence certainly elevates any Jefferson Airplane Starship album, in my opinion. But of course, it was criticized for it being too polished with that 80s production sound. I happen to be a child of the 80s, so you're going to notice that a lot of these albums that are the 80s albums that people didn't like, maybe they were the fans from the 70s or early 80s when things were heavier, but I really enjoy this sort of stuff. And favorite track off there, I don't know which single it was, but definitely one of the main singles, Find Your Way Back. It's a perfect song to kick off the album, and I absolutely love it. So still looking for it on CD. One day I'll have it in the collection, but until then, it's going to be on LP. Coming in at number 6, I get a lot of flack for this in my album ranking by this band. Iron Maiden, No Prayer for the Dying, 1990 release, 8th studio album. I love this album, and I talk about it being my favorite of the Iron Maiden albums, and people just are always shocked that I have it so high in my album ranking. No, it's not as good as the classic albums, but I will say it's probably also nostalgic. That's the first Iron Maiden album on CD, or new I should say, because I did get Power Slave first on cassette, but as a new album coming out, it was that one, and I love it. It was also the first new album to feature Janet Gears, who comes from Gillan, Bruce Dickinson solo, and of course going way back, new wave of British heavy metal band White Spirit, and if you're not familiar with them, check them out. And of course, so this album here, I think it probably gets the most flack because it's such a huge departure from Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which incidentally, I don't really like that album because of its heavy reliance on keyboards. But a lot of people do love that album. This one here stripped all that stuff away. It's a much more raw production, and I think that was a shock to fans at the time. More straight ahead, almost rock songs than metal songs. But it pulls me in. I love it. Favorite song on there, Hooks in You. Okay, coming in at number 5, Guns N' Roses, Chinese Democracy from 2008, 6th studio album. 17 long years for that album to be made still boggles my mind, and who knows what the album could have sounded like if it had come out any other time prior to that, because of all the re-records that happened and so forth. Generally considered one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive album ever made. Axl being the only original member of the band left, although it did have Dizzy Reed, who had been in the band since 1991, so I kind of considered him from the original era. But all the other musicians in here are new, and I think that's probably the biggest reason people couldn't get on board with it. It is criticized for its overproduction, and I will agree with that. Too many layered parts. You almost don't know what's going on sometimes in it, but to the same degree, while it lacked that sense of dangerous attitude that we know from Appetite and Use Your Illusions, this was a very different album, made years and years later kind of a thing. It did have that big sort of bombastic, over-the-top feel that other tracks from Guns N' Roses had, notably things like November Rain. My favorite song on here being Madagascar, so songs like November Rain, Estranged, Don't Cry, stuff like that. They do that big, huge production, and this is probably where Axl, wanting to be more sounding like Queen, brought that into this here. And so while the album itself is really very different than anything else that the band had done, I don't know, this album sticks with me, and I pull it out and I listen to it over and over. I would love to hear a stripped down version of this album, but for what it is, I still enjoy it. Okay, coming in at number 4, and the reason I'm wearing this shirt here, yes, Drama, 1980, their 10th studio album at the time. I'm a big Yes fan, but incidentally, that is my favorite Yes album. So it followed the departure of 2 key members, John Anderson on vocals, Rick Wakeman on keyboards, and featured 2 new members. We had Trevor Horn on vocals, and Jeff Downes coming in on keyboards. Incidentally, Jeff Downes is back in the band today, which I absolutely love because I'm a huge Asia fan. And that's how I found this album. I decided to give it a chance because I was a Jeff Downes fan from Asia, and so I bought this album and ended up loving it. And that's probably why I can love some of these when some fans can't, because I came to them after the fact. Some of these I did not grow up with. Chinese Democracy, obviously, I was already a Guns N' Roses fan and was able to enjoy that, but a lot of these I bought after the fact and so was not coming up with those bands. And I think sometimes that's why music fans like myself can enjoy these things when other music fans who maybe grew up with it can't, and I totally get that. At the time, the Yes album Drama was released to generally positive reviews from the critics, but the fans just didn't get behind it. It was the first album not to go gold. Favorite track, Into the Lens, incidentally was re-recorded by Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes in the Buggles for their second album. So kind of cool that they did that. Coming in at number 3, Kiss, Dynasty from 1979, my favorite of all the Kiss albums. 7th album released by them, and generally not liked due to the fact that Kiss went in the disco direction, kind of jumping on the bandwagon. I mean, Paul Stanley will even talk about it. Wasn't a fan of it, thought the music was too simple, and was sort of screwing around and wrote I Was Made for Loving You, which incidentally went all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. So they have a number 1 hit. The album can't be that bad if the band ended up having a number 1 hit on it, going platinum and so forth. But generally, it is considered to not be a good Kiss album, a misstep. But for me at least, that mix of the disco with the rock, I absolutely love. And there are very few albums out there that do it as a whole. There's a lot of one-off songs that do it, but I, for whatever reason, very much enjoy that extra little infusion of the beat into the music, and this album has it all the way through. I very much enjoy it. Favorite song is Dirty Livin', which is actually sung by Peter Criss. I'm a big Peter Criss fan. I love his gravelly sort of vocals that he does on things, and he's got a swagger to him that is different than Paul and Gene, and even when Ace is singing and so forth. Okay, coming in at number 2, Judas Priest, Turbo, 1986, their 10th studio album. Incidentally, I have done a whole video about why there are fans that love this album versus hate this album, kind of a thing. If I remember, I'm going to put a link in this for you guys to check that out. I do it with my good friend Chris Prophy. We are the CD and vinyl guys. We do some episodes like that. But regarding this album, just notable for its change to a very commercial direction, adding synthesizers for the first time. Wouldn't be the last time, though. Still, though, they had a huge hit with Turbo Lover, and it's played a lot to this day. So even with fans who don't like the album, that song in and of itself, which is a very 80s synth-driven song on it, is still played a lot. And I think it's one of the albums that it's most divided fans because of that 80s production that is throughout this thing. My favorite song on the album is actually Out in the Cold, which is not a very heavy song at all, but I absolutely love it from the live performances where they would start performing that song off stage and slowly Rob Halford would come out singing, and it's just a very, very cool track in the way that that was done. All right, and the number 1 album that is hated, that I absolutely love, and you guys have heard me talk about this over and over and over, AC/DC's Fly on the Wall, my favorite AC/DC album from 1985. It's not my first album by AC/DC. My first one was actually The Razor's Edge, so it doesn't have anything to do with that. I actually came into the album much, much later. But people generally do not like the production to this album. For me, I've never had an issue with it. That has not ever been something that has bothered me about this. I think that the album probably registers more with me because of the movie Maximum Overdrive, the Stephen King movie, where AC/DC's music is played throughout the film. Angus Young actually scores the film with a lot of little guitar fills and whatnot. And there's a number of tracks from this album, Fly on the Wall, that appear in it. And I grew up loving that movie. Bottom line, though, there are some real stellar tracks on this album. Shake Your Foundations, which is probably my favorite song on the album, but also First Blood, Sink the Pink, Playing with Girls. For me, this album is perfect from start to finish. I don't mind the production. When I say I don't mind, don't even notice it, meaning I like it. So it's not one of those things that I think could be better if they remixed it or whatever, but I really like the sound of the album. I love the songs that are on it, and I like it from start to finish. That's why it's coming in at #1 for me as one of the albums that is the most hated by fans, but yet I love. And I'm sure you guys have your own albums that you love despite other music fans hating them and whatnot. So, let me know what those are and what you think of this list here. And there you go. Certainly, if you've enjoyed this video, consider sharing it out on social media to help spread the word. I would greatly appreciate that. Everyone take care, and certainly do check back next Tuesday for another one of these Top 10 Countdown videos. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.